17 December 1996, Lima, Peru. It was Japan's Emperor Akihito's birthday, and the Japanese ambassador in Peru, Morihisa Aoki, decided to commemorate the night with important guests and the residents. Peruvian government officials, diplomats, businessmen, and military across all branches were just a few who were invited and celebrated with whiskey, delicacies, and company. Outside the area, a 12-feet concrete wall and guards surrounded the entrance and exit, ensuring the safety of the guests within the event. The residence also had blast-proof doors and windows that prevented any gunshots or explosions from reaching inside. With the high street security nonetheless, a group of 14 men and women saw the event as an opportunity. Hiding inside of an ambulance that was robbed days prior and disguised as a paramedic, a member calls out a guard of the neighboring residence, and without knowing, they aimed at him, seeking to enter. Once passed through the military, the armed group then plants dynamite against the 12-foot wall connecting from the neighboring building and blast a hole, creating their own entrance and reaching inside the residence area. Over 700 guests, in a state of panic and confusion, soon realized by the sounds of explosions and gunshots that they had been captured by one of the most dangerous terrorist movements to exist in Peru, known as MRTA, or Movement Revolution Tupac Amaru.
En el Perú, no vamos a aceptar el terrorismo.
A shocking breaking story from Lima, Peru. Outside the Japanese ambassador's residence, all hell broke loose.
We take you to one of the remote areas of the world, to the high Andes of Peru.
A bit of background is necessary to understand what led to the horrible committed actions. After Peru gained independence from Spain, land continued to be controlled by large businessmen linked to foreign interests. Indigenous groups that previously owned the land were employed into a system that exploited the labor with the idea that the land still contributed to them.
A peasant's life is a life of misery.
Through means of survival, the indigenous tribe lived by the labor for its minimal compensation. Means of payments were either unpaid, such with housing, food, and alcohol to maintain dependency, or underpaid, with most of their money disappearing with the purchase of food they themselves produced.
¿Sabe silbar? Sí, a ver silbar. Pero al que deje de silbar, Juan, me lo despides enseguida.
Fast forward to the 1950s. The Cuban Revolution, led by Che Guevara and Fidel Castro, succeeded and started to inspire Peru and other Latin countries that were suffering from economic instability and government ignorance of the working class. In fear that these Latin countries were to be vulnerable to the ideas of communism, in 1961, US President JFK proposed a program called Alianza for the Progress to aid the economy and fairness in improving the living standards of the working class. And so Peru followed the program. In 1969 to 1979, the agrarian reform was to redistribute the entire land to their entire workers, which was approximately 370,000 families. Returning the land to the indigenous was fair, but poor guidance led to minimal commercialization and agriculture productivity across Peru. Ultimately, the reform failed and created greater inequality and contributed to a period of economic stagnation. Thus, MRTA came to exist. From communist ideologies and the support of the agriculture working class, it is estimated that the rebel group at its peak had around 300 to 1,000 members. Most of the members would get recruited through rural communities across Peru, affected by the agrarian reform, and also coercing their youth. Popularity of the movement would also rise with radio stations broadcasting MRTA propaganda. But the necessity of funding and government recognition resulted in acts of terrorism. A few examples were bank robberies for easy money grabs and attacks at the US Embassy for intervening with other countries' conflicts. Injuring and murdering innocents within the area of MRTA attacks were common, increasing insecurity outside of the streets. Once President Alberto Fujimori was elected in 1995, promises were made based on ending terrorism, and it would lead to several members from MRTA to prison, with the most notable being one of the original leaders, Rincon, while attempting to invade Peru's White House. With personal shortage and money dwindling during 1996, MRTA decided that the Embassy of Japan would be the next target for providing financial support to Fujimori political reforms due to his Japanese descent. Military rapidly surrounded the premise, aiming to retake the residence and save the hostages. With the last attempt, with tear gases, The movement were prepared, putting gas masks while leaving the hostages to struggle breathing. Inside the residence, guards would attempt to flush their badges to hide any evidence in connection to the military, while the other members would be forced to lay down on the ground to not get hit by any bullets aimed outside. To calm the situation, MRTA forced the Japan's ambassador with a megaphone to plead them to stop shooting. The military could only call back and wait for further orders, allowing the terrorists to strengthen their security with booby traps. The MRTA leader Nestor Serpa Cartolini finally appeared, demanding $7 million and the release of all 300 MRTA prisoners. If these conditions were not met by tomorrow noon, the foreign minister of Peru would die. President Fujimori, once hearing about the news, walked a thin line in saving his political and foreign members without letting any casualties or meeting terrorist demands. For his reputation and ego, it is a disaster for his entire presidential term, with the original promises stating to end terrorism. The idea that a single important member death could destroy Peru's image, that they already defeated terrorism to the world. Yet, accepting the deal of the terrorists, it would allow future terror attacks and years of capturing the terrorist members again. The decision was for Fujimori to remain silent and not to agree with the terrorist demands. The act of silence helped Fujimori from preventing the terrorists to do any harm to the member, as it could get them full permission to charge in the residence. Then, as the next day noon arrived, Cartolini gave mercy, telling him that he's living on borrowed time. To further improve negotiations and public image, Cartolini also offered releasing the event workers, women, and elderly. With over 170 hostages let go, a major slip-up was Cartolini accidentally releasing the president's mother and brother, fumbling a huge pawn trade. The president and his party started looking up for ideas so the military can regain control. The first plan was called Operation Santa Claus. The goal was to use fireworks during Christmas to sneak up to the roofs of the residence and to enter through the windows. However, it was scrapped off as there was several risks and it possibly being too obvious. They couldn't go on foot as there were traps already set up. By air, the element of surprise would disappear. Then, it came the idea of going underneath. Inspired by Peruvian archaeological ruin Chavin with its immense tunnel system, Operation Chavin de Huantar was born. The plan was to build a 5-meter depth, a 20-meter long tunnel from neighboring houses into 3 areas of the residence: the kitchen, the ballroom, and the dining room, where the turning point was to explode underneath it so 140 troops could march in. It would take months to reach to their destination. 32 miners would live in these tunnels without being able to communicate outside or leave. This was their home until operation ended. To avoid suspicion, no heavy machinery could be used as it could alert the terrorists of the plan. To reduce sounds from the tunnel, huge speakers would surround the building blasting music. Behind the scenes, President Fujimori pretended accepting negotiations by meeting up with world leaders to create a story about seeking financial support and the opportunity for the terrorists to leave the country. In the meantime, preparations were made with a replica of the building for simulation and familiarizing the environment. The groups would be divided into 2. Team Alpha would take charge of the first floor, while the Team Delta would take charge of the second. The government also cut the water supply and energy to depend on exterior aid for entertainment and food resources. Apart from providing reports of the hostage conditions and the terrorist locations, it created an opportunity of hiding microphones within the distributed objects. One of the hostage members, Luis Giampietri, an admiral that taught on war tactics, knew some possible strategies. Therefore, he started acting paranoid, whispering in every room to check if someone was listening, asking, "If you can hear me, play the cucaracha." Soon enough, his message was received. After getting shared a beeper from another member, they now have a receiver and transmitter to share crucial information. Around that time, boredom also increased, creating a mutual relationship between the terrorists and hostages for entertainment in either books or soccer. Soccer was the biggest opportunity to strike by planting bombs below, as most of the terrorists would frequently be in one area. Before the final day, the plan almost failed, as the news would leak about the secret tunnel here in underground construction easily, yet the terrorists dismissed it afterwards after the president denied it. On the 6th of April 1997, Agent Luis Giampietri receives a message: "Mary is sick. Mary is sick. And minutes later, during soccer time, it began. 6 members instantly perished in the soccer room. 1 member and the leader headed upstairs, yet were struck down. 3 members raised their arms to give up, but still got shot, causing controversy later on. The rest were either attacking the hostages or the military. As some hostages would be able to get rescued by the military, some were still running or hiding. For Foreign Minister Peru Tudela, he was able to reach the roof to escape, but got shot in the ankle. Before getting shot again, Valor officer stepped up to take the bullets, letting the foreign minister escape. When Captain Jimenez noticed an injured comrade, he also tried reaching to him, but he would get struck by a grenade and die. Lastly, Carlos Giusti, a Supreme Court justice, while escaping, was shot in the leg. Even though he managed to escape, he later suffered of a heart attack and died. Carolini had an additional main request. It was releasing solely his girlfriend in exchange of the hostages. This upset the rebels, and if he had more patience, he could have lived to see her be free in 2010. After 22 minutes, the flag or MRTA of the residence roof was thrown, signifying the end of terrorism of Peru. These 22 minutes that might have felt forever from 126 days in captivity. All 14 rebels died, 3 casualties, yet 72 hostages were freed. And for President Fujimori, he was paraded for conducting one of the most successful operations against terrorism in Peru, and his future of the presidency seemed to be bright, at least for now.